Most people look at the Kawasaki W230 and immediately dismiss it as just another retro bike. I almost did the same. And honestly, that reaction is exactly why this motorcycle is more interesting than it looks. When I first started digging into the W230, I expected a watered-down nostalgia play, a small engine, classic styling, nothing to think too hard about. But the more I compared it to what's actually on the market right now, the more I realized Kawasaki is doing something very deliberate here. The W230 isn't trying to impress you on paper, it's trying to make you slow down mentally. That alone already puts it at odds with most modern bikes. What stood out to me first wasn't the engine or the design, it was the intent. Kawasaki clearly isn't chasing performance numbers with this bike, and that's almost rebellious in 2026. I compared it in my head to bikes like the Royal Enfield Hunter 350 and even Honda's smaller classics. Those bikes lean either into budget friendliness or everyday practicality. The W230 feels more like a mood than a spec sheet. The engine size is modest, and yes, some people will instantly complain about power, but I kept asking myself a different question. How often do riders actually use full power on a daily basis? Most people miss this. Low-powered bikes aren't boring by default, they're only boring if the riding experience is poorly thought out, and the W230 doesn't feel poorly thought out at all. I noticed Kawasaki kept the design extremely clean. No forced retro gimmicks, no unnecessary electronics trying to look vintage. It feels honest, and that honesty is rare now. One misconception I keep seeing online is that the W230 is meant for beginners only. I don't fully agree with that. Yes, it's approachable, but approachable doesn't mean disposable. I've spent enough time around motorcycles to know that experienced riders often come back to simple bikes later in life, not because they can't handle more power, but because they're tired of fighting complexity. The riding position on the W230 is another thing people underestimate. It's upright, relaxed, and neutral. That sounds boring until you ride something like this for an hour and realize how little fatigue it creates. Here's a practical takeaway most buyers don't consider. A comfortable bike gets ridden more, and a bike that gets ridden more is always worth more than one that sits in the garage. I also thought about urban riding. The W230 makes a lot of sense there, not just because of size, but because of how unintimidating it feels in traffic. What surprised me was how Kawasaki resisted over-modernizing it. No massive screens, no aggressive ride modes, just what you actually need. Some people will call that outdated. I call it focused. There's also a psychological side to this bike that rarely gets discussed. When you ride something simple, you ride differently. You stop chasing speed and start noticing the ride itself. I've felt this on other small displacement bikes, and I suspect the W230 delivers the same experience. You become smoother, more deliberate, less rushed. A common mistake people make is comparing the W230 directly to faster bikes in the same price range. That comparison misses the point entirely. This bike isn't competing for lap times. It's competing for your attention on a quiet back road. Another thing I noticed is how Kawasaki positioned the W230 visually. It doesn't scream for attention, it almost blends into the background. That's a strange compliment, but I mean it in a good way. This is the kind of bike strangers approach out of curiosity, not shock. From a practical ownership standpoint, this bike also makes sense long-term. Simple engineering usually means easier maintenance, and easier maintenance means lower stress. Most riders underestimate how much that matters until something breaks. I also kept thinking about new riders who want something with character. The W230 offers that without overwhelming them. That's a difficult balance to strike. At the same time, experienced riders might appreciate it as a second bike, something you ride when you don't want to think too much, something that feels like riding for riding's sake. One misconception I want to clear up is that retro automatically means outdated performance. Retro styling doesn't have to equal bad engineering. Kawasaki knows how to build reliable engines, even small ones. The real question isn't whether the W230 is fast enough, it's whether it's engaging enough. And based on its design philosophy, I think it is. Here's another practical insight. If a bike encourages you to ride more often, it improves your skills naturally. Low-pressure riding environments make better riders over time. That's something high-powered bikes don't always offer. I also thought about fuel efficiency and day-to-day costs. While not flashy, these factors matter long-term. The W230 feels like a bike you own without constantly worrying about it. What I personally like most is that Kawasaki didn't try to turn this into a statement bike. It doesn't try to prove anything. It just exists quietly. In a market full of aggressive designs and overstimulation, that quiet confidence stands out. Another thing people miss is emotional longevity. High-performance bikes often lose their magic once the thrill fades. Simple bikes age better emotionally. You grow with them instead of outgrowing them. If I had to point out one real risk with the W230, it's perception. People might not understand it at first glance, and motorcycles like this need understanding. But for the right rider, that's not a flaw, it's a filter. I imagine the W230 appealing to someone who values feel over flash, someone who enjoys riding early in the morning, someone who doesn't need validation through speed. That might sound niche, but it's actually a growing group. As motorcycling matures, more riders are realizing that enjoyment doesn't scale linearly with horsepower. Sometimes it moves in the opposite direction. When I step back and look at the W230 as a whole, I don't see a compromise. I see a conscious choice, and that's what makes it interesting to me. This isn't a bike for everyone. It's a bike for people who know what they want or are tired of chasing what they thought they wanted. If I were choosing the Kawasaki W230, it wouldn't be because it's the best on paper. It would be because it feels honest. And honestly, that might be its strongest feature.